In our first service,
a short presentation on Ellen White's concept of the 7 plagues. And basically, I'm just going to follow my notes as I did in the first presentation. This is shorter, significantly shorter. Ellen White had much to say in great controversy about Daniel and Revelation. However, there are some portions of these books that she never quoted, such as the supernatural darkness of the 5th plague, and the drying up of the Euphrates, the battle of Armageddon, and the kings from the east of the 6th. She never quoted the verses. Is it just possible that she had much to say about these verses, although she never quoted them? Let's consider the last 3 plagues of Revelation 16 as an example of how to find Ellen White's commentary on verses that she never quoted. Now, I need to make a clarification. That is that when it comes to the 6th plague, Ellen White does quote verses 13 to 15, but those verses go back to probationary time. Verse 12 and verse 16 take us to the time of the 6th plague. So I want to make that clear. Strangely enough, however, in the next 7 pages, so she quotes phrases from the first 4 plagues on page 628, but in the next 7 pages, she did not follow up with the last 3. Yes?
what page are you on?
It's on the screen. Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm following your
Actually, I rearranged the order. Ellen White and the last 3 plagues. You got it? No, that's in the wrong place. You got to search for in yellow. I added some things, so I thought that we had on the screen. Let's see. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. All right. In Great Controversy 628, there at the bottom of the screen, Ellen White used less than 1 page to describe the first 4 plagues, quoting phrases from all 4. Strangely enough, however, in the next 7 pages, she did not follow up with the last 3. In fact, after page 628, she never quoted any verses from the 5th or 6th plagues in the rest of the book. This has led some to wonder whether Ellen White had any light on the supernatural darkness of the 5th plague, and the drying up of the Euphrates, the battle of Armageddon, and the kings that come from the east in the 6th. It is important to note, however, that Ellen White did quote verses that describe the 7th plague in Great Controversy 636 and 637. Thus, she quoted from the first 4 plagues on page 628, and the 7th plague on pages 636 and 637, but quoted no verses on the 5th or 6th in between. Thus, there appears to be a gap between the 4th plague and the 7th in her writings. Summarizing, page 628, she quotes phrases from the first 4 plagues. Page 629 to 635, no quotations on plagues 5 and 6. And then 636 and 37, she quotes phrases from the 7th plague. On the surface, it would appear that Ellen White had nothing to say in Great Controversy about the 5th and 6th plagues, because she does not quote any verses. However, as we shall see, appearances can be deceiving. If Ellen White did offer commentary on the 5th and 6th plagues, where would we expect to find it? Where would we look for her remarks on the plague of darkness, the drying up of the Euphrates, the battle of Armageddon, and the kings that come from the east? The answer to this question is obvious. If she quotes verses from the first 4 plagues in Great Controversy 628, and the 7th plague in Great Controversy 636 and 37, we would expect her commentary on the 5th and 6th somewhere in between. The key to understand Ellen White's perspective of the 5th and 6th plagues is in Great Controversy 635, where she describes the wicked multitudes of Babylon, the swirling waters of the symbolic Euphrates upon which the harlot sits, preparing to execute the death decree. As the flooding waters are about to slay God's people, the darkness of the fifth plague falls upon the earth, upon Babylon. Here is how Ellen White described the events leading up to the fifth plague of darkness. So the first four plagues are what I call jeopardy plagues, because God's people are in danger. The last three plagues are deliverance plagues, because from the point of the fifth plague to the seventh, God's people are not in danger anymore, because the wicked are going to turn on the harlot. So let's continue. Here she's going to describe the first four plagues have passed, and now she's going to describe the plague of darkness, although she doesn't quote the verses from Revelation. With shouts of triumph, jeering and imprecation, throngs of evil men, this is the symbolic Euphrates, are about to rush. What is it that rushes? Waters. Are about to rush upon their prey when lo, a dense blackness deeper than the darkness of the night falls upon the earth. That's the plague of darkness. Doesn't quote verses, but it's the darkness. It should not surprise us that the rushing waters of the sea in Scripture symbolize multitudes, nations, and peoples that are inimical to God's people and which God will rebuke. So you have Isaiah 17, 12 and 13. We usually use Revelation 17, 15, but I think Isaiah is even more powerful. Woe to the multitude of many people who make a noise like the roar of the seas, and the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations will rush like the rushing. I think that rushing has something to do with waters. The rushing of many waters, but God will rebuke them, and they will flee far away and be chased like the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. So the darkness of the fifth plague arrests the multitudes. And the harlot sits upon what? Multitudes, nations, tongues, and peoples. So the darkness of the sixth plague arrests the multitudes, that is, dries up the waters of the symbolic Euphrates upon which the harlot sits. This is how Ellen White describes it. After the darkness, she says the angry multitudes, that's the waters, are suddenly what? Arrested. That's the drying up of the waters. Their mocking cries die away. The objects of their murderous rage are forgotten. So the fifth plague, no danger anymore for God's people. In the scenario that Ellen White portrays, after the darkness of the fifth plague and the drying up of the waters of the sixth, now here comes the key point, the kings, Christ and his angels, come from the east to rescue the persecuted remnant. That's plague number 7, by the way. Ellen White writes, these are the kings that come from the east. It says there in Great Controversy 6:40 and 41, soon there appears in the east a small cloud about half the size of a man's hand. Jesus rides forth as a mighty conqueror, faithful and true, in righteousness he doth judge and make war. And the armies which were in heaven follow him. These are the kings from the east, with anthems of celestial melody. The holy angels, a vast unnumbered throng, attend him on his way. So this is how it works out. The wicked multitudes of Babylon, the symbolic Euphrates upon which the harlot sits, are about to drown God's people. A dense darkness of the fifth plague falls upon the earth. The angry waters of Babylon's symbolic Euphrates suddenly dry up or are arrested when God's voice utters the words, "It is done," symbolically portrayed as a breath or sword from his mouth. And then Jesus and the angels come from the east to gather the remnant. However, there is still a missing piece of the puzzle. In the following chapter, which is the desolation of the earth, Ellen White explains that the supporters of Babylon will not only withdraw their support or dry up on Babylon. After withdrawing their support, they will turn against the religious leaders of Babylon to drown them, so to speak. So the waters are not only going to withdraw their support, they're actually going to turn on the harlot. In the chapter, The Desolation of the Earth, Ellen White returns to the moment when the voice of God delivered his people from the raging waters of Babylon. That's Great Controversy 6:35. We know that she returned to the beginning point of the previous chapter because both begin with the voice of God turning the captivity of his people. In Great Controversy 6:54, The chapter on the desolation of the earth begins when the voice of God turns the captivity of his people, which was also the beginning of the previous chapter. There is a terrible awakening of those who have lost all in the great conflict of life. Then Ellen White expands upon the meaning of the drying up of the waters and how they will vent their rage against the religious leaders of Babylon who have deceived them. And this is how she describes it. The people, once again, the waters, see that they have been deluded. They accuse one another of having led them to destruction, but all unite in heaping their bitterest condemnation upon the ministers. They're going to turn on the harlot and the religious leaders. Unfaithful pastors have prophesied smooth things. You know, it's a very serious thing to be a pastor, to be a preacher. Unfaithful pastors have prophesied smooth things. They have led their hearers to make void the law of God and to persecute those who would keep it holy. Now in their despair, these teachers confess before the world their work of deception. The multitudes, one of the words that is used for the waters in Revelation 17, the multitudes are filled with fury. Not at God's people anymore, folks. The multitudes are filled with fury. We are lost, they cry, and you are the cause of our ruin. And they turn upon the false shepherds. The very ones that once admired them most will pronounce upon them the most dreadful curses. The very hands that once crowned them with laurels will be raised for their destruction. The swords which were to slay God's people are now employed to destroy their enemies. Everywhere there is strife and bloodshed. You know, this is foreshadowed in what happened at the edge of the Red Sea. You remember that the armies of Pharaoh were coming after the Israelites, and they were caught. There was no escape. The Gulf of Aqaba was in front of them, very deep. The Egyptians were behind. They were hemmed in. And it looked like they were going to be destroyed. But then Exodus 14 describes how the pillar that went before them, the pillar of fire, moved over their heads and interposed between them and the Egyptians. And it was darkness on the side of the Egyptians, but light on the side of God's people. And then the waters of the Red Sea are dried up to provide a way for the escape of God's people. And then the Egyptians entered, and the waters that dried up to provide an escape for God's people drowned the Egyptians. So there you have a very interesting typological relationship. So anyway, that's it. By the way, this period of the 5th, 6th, and 7th plagues is the very moment that Daniel chapter 11, verse 45 describes as, he shall come to his end with none to help him. The waters will dry up. The daughters will dry up. And the kings of the earth will turn against the harlot, according to what Revelation chapter 17 tells us.
All right, thank you. Can you remain there, Pastor? We
Okay.
have some questions for you.
All right.
All right, so do we have a wandering microphone? Is it somewhere in the building? There's a yellow-topped microphone somewhere. Does somebody see it? Oh, yes, here we are. Okay, thank you, Todd. All right, anybody have any questions, comments you'd like to share with Elder Bohr? Yes, gentleman here with the right beside you there, Todd, guy with the baseball cap on. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the research, for the many hours. You presented it in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and it took you many hours to do that work. I have, I don't know if it is a question or a clarification. It seems to me, maybe it's bad perception on my part, it seems to me that you equate 1145 to the second coming, when the beast, or the king of the north, is going to be destroyed.
Okay, the answer to that is that Daniel 11:45, the last phrase, he will come to his end with none to help him. I do not see that as the second coming of Christ. I see that as the moment when those who supported this system actually turn against the system. they turn against the harlot that has deceived them and the daughters that have deceived them as well. And then, of course, that prepares the way for the coming of Christ with the angelic hosts,
Okay.
which is mentioned in Revelation 16, the moment of the sixth plague.
I see 11:45 simultaneous with 12:1 when the 10 kings take away the political power, but they don't destroy the king of the north in 11:45. In 2 Thessalonians 2:13, the beast, the king of the north is going to destroy at the second coming. So the sequence is 11:45, but the papacy is going to be destroyed at the second coming after the voice of God that liberates us.
There's actually no contradiction between one and the other. Before Jesus comes with the armies of heaven, those that supported Babylon are going to take away their support. And when they're slaying one another, you can read this in Great Controversy, at that very moment, then Jesus will be coming on the clouds of heaven to destroy everyone by the brightness of his coming. So in other words, first the withdrawal of support, which prepares the way, according to Revelation chapter 16, for the coming of Christ and his host. When Jesus comes, the wicked are not going to be shooting nuclear weapons at Christ. You know, like many evangelicals teach, that the final war of Armageddon is that the wicked are going to be shooting at Christ as he's coming on the clouds. No, not at all. When Jesus returns, when Jesus comes back, the wicked are not focused on Jesus. The wicked are focused on destroying the enemies that they had considered friends before. Does that help?
All right.